Hey everyone, I'm Jay Smith, and this is Bradley Kendall, and this is After Further Review, where we'll be looking at some of the current topics dominating the college football landscape. So Bradley, after further review?
Duke beat Notre Dame, and it's not basketball season. So we're going to take a look at the 5 biggest games like we did last week. We're going to start with the Duke-Notre Dame game, of course, which I don't think anybody saw coming. We had a 21-point line on this. Notre Dame was favored at home.
Yeah, I mean, at home, and Duke, I think, honestly, one of the most shocking games from this weekend, because going into that game, nobody really gave the Blue Devils credit. We were kind of we were talking last week about how the Duke had kind of fallen off national prominence, in the last couple of years. David Cutcliffe, he's done a great job with the Blue Devils, recently, but they just hadn't been the same until, that offensive showcase that they put on at Notre Dame this week.
And this was supposed to be a week where Notre Dame was going to be able to get things back together, work on some things, get back to the way they should have been at the beginning of the year.
For sure.
And now they're sitting at 1-3, and Brian Kelly, his seat is hotter than it is outside right now.
Well, they fired the defensive coordinator, and me personally, I'm not really a big fan, and we'll talk about Les Miles later because that was big news.
That's big news from yesterday.
Yesterday. But as far as firing coordinators or coaches during the middle of the season, I'm not a proponent of that because I feel like no matter who you bring in, whether it's you move an assistant coach up into the head coaching position or you bring in a totally new guy, it's a brand new system. It's a brand new way of doing things. It's a brand new atmosphere at practice, the locker room. All those sorts of things change.
It trickles down.
Right. So I don't feel like firing a coordinator mid-season. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was an embarrassing performance. We're not doubting that. I mean, something has to be fixed. But again, like long-term benefit, I'm just not seeing it being that advantageous for Notre Dame to get rid of him.
It was really just Brian Kelly making him like a scapegoat.
Yeah, I never really thought of Brian Kelly as somebody who would point the finger.
You really wouldn't think so?
And get rid of different coordinators. But again, after this game and their start to the season, I believe they're 1-3 now. They've lost 1-3. They lost to Texas in the opener. They lost to Michigan State at home, and now they've lost to Duke at home. So their season's pretty much in.
They're definitely out of it. Brian Kelly at this point is just trying to make it look like an okay season at least at this point.
Not a great year for the Irish.
Duke, how about the Dukies? I mean, David Cutcliffe coming in, he returned to Notre Dame for the first time in a while and got his team together. This was coming after losing to Wake Forest and Northwestern. Really not too confident going into this game, I would think. It must have been a pretty good pep talk, I would say, before the game.
And Duke, I think earlier this year they lost to Wake Forest.
Wake Forest,
Wake Forest is 4-0 right now. So we'll talk a little bit later about is Wake Forest for real or not. But after the Wake Forest loss, everybody. It was just kind of like, oh, Duke's. I didn't think Duke was going to make a bowl game.
Yeah, exactly.
After seeing that score, I was like, okay, Duke's not going to make a bowl game this year. Yeah. Maybe Cutcliffe is out, not this season, but maybe next.
Maybe not. Maybe you're right.
But could have been. I think the expectation now for Duke is to make a bowl game.
It is.
Honestly,
that's been always the goal since Cutcliffe came in.
I think now that they realistically every year have a shot at making a bowl game, maybe not a overly prestigious one, but I think Duke is they're back in the middle tier of college football.
They're in contention, especially in the Coastal, since it's kind of a weaker part of the ACC. But yeah, big step up for them. They did what they needed to do.
For sure.
Their run game was spectacular. I mean, Notre Dame, their defensive coordinator, really.
Oh yeah.
It's been a rough week for him. It'll be tough for him to search for a job after the way he got his team going for this game.
Notre Dame. Well, again, some of it is on the coordinator, some of it's on the players.
And Brian Kelly mentioned that it was all on the players. He put every bit of the blame on the players, which you don't see very often, especially from him.
No, and again, that just begs the question why they thought that it was a good decision to fire the coordinator unless they were feeling pressure from boosters or outside influences. Because 4 games into the season, in my opinion, it's a little early. But
I would say, And you look at Les Miles, the main thing they were talking about him, we'll get to that later, is that he's not really subject to change, and he likes to stick with the way that he's had things and keep them in place. Brian Kelly, he wants to change. He wants things to get back to the way they were before, and that involves getting a better defense.
Well, Notre Dame, the expectation is to compete for maybe not a national championship, but to be
in the national prominence.
Well, right, a top 25 program at all times. I mean, they're Notre Dame now not being ranked. It's been uncharted waters.
It's going back to the Brady Hoke era that they had a few years ago. And it's especially for Notre Dame. I mean, the added pressure of having all those championships, that prestige with them. Other teams being 1-3, it might not be that big of a red flag, but Notre Dame, that's a big challenge for them. So we'll move on to our next game. We got Florida and Tennessee. Game day, of course. It was a top 20 matchup. people were coming to this game thinking Tennessee's really got to prove themselves here, or they might be counted out.
Well, they had lost, I believe, 11 straight to Florida.
Since like 04,
yeah,
I think.
Something like that. So it had been a long time since the Vols had been able to beat the Gators. I didn't really get a chance to watch this game. I know that Florida was
up big early.
Exactly. They had them, it was almost like, I don't think it was quite the scale of like an Ole Miss meltdown.
No.
But Florida had their number.
And, I mean, they probably go into the locker room thinking, okay, we got this. Our backup quarterback is actually showing some signs of brightness.
Yeah, I mean, that was really impressive for him to come out and have the first half.
Austin Appleby, 23 of 39 total, 3 touchdowns, 300 yards. You'd think he'd be in pretty good shape with that.
Yeah, so
it's more than you could ask.
Well, and that game, like I said, I don't have the box score pulled up, but Tennessee ended up winning by 10. So, if you're Tennessee, I mean, they're 4-0 now. They haven't played their best. We know that.
No, they haven't.
I mean, you look at App State, other games. So they haven't really proven themselves yet, similar to Clemson, which, again, we'll talk about later in the show. But they've done what they've needed to do.
They needed this win.
Right,
they
exactly, to stay undefeated. Yep. So now if you're Tennessee, it's almost yours to lose. Because even though you've scraped by, it hasn't been graceful by any stretch of the imagination, you're still into pole position.
You're still 4-0, and that's what Butch Jones is probably telling us. Don't listen to the outside influences. Your record is all that matters, and that's all you can control. And they needed that win because that's one of 4 really important games they have coming up. They've got that out of the way. They have Georgia coming up next. We'll get to that later.
Yep.
On the road, even though Georgia got blown out, it's still a huge game.
And maybe now that they've been able to finally beat Florida, because again, it's been almost a dozen years.
You got that pressure out of the way.
Well, right, and you get over the hump.
You do.
It's like when Clemson was struggling against Carolina and they lost 5 in a row, and it was just Clemson. They just could not. They could play well the beginning of the season, but when they got to the Carolina game, they hit a wall, and it took a few years for Dabo and his team to get over that hump. And now that we have gotten over that hump of beating Carolina, and we've beaten them 2 years in a row now, things have it's been a little bit smoother.
Kind of reminds me of the Roll Tide War Eagle documentary, if you've seen that. Auburn just couldn't beat Alabama. You beat them once, look at that, they're already contending for a national championship.
You get over that hump.
You get over that hump, that's huge.
For sure. And moving on now, looking at a game that the final score really surprised me. I know it surprised all of us.
I'm sure even Wisconsin's players were surprised by this.
30-6, Wisconsin beating up on Michigan State. And
I remember looking at all the pregame shows. I don't think anybody picked Wisconsin.
Well, not after that performance against Georgia State.
No.
I mean, it was a fourth quarter, they barely got that win. It was an embarrassing win. And they just shut Michigan State down.
And really, I mean, you think Wisconsin was just too good to be true. Like, they came in, they got shot all the way up to the number 9 in the country after just beating LSU, and you see how that win's not that great anymore.
A lot of people are saying overrated. They're going to fall. They're going to get destroyed.
Their running backs hurt, like we mentioned last week, Corey Clement. They got a backup quarterback that you just brought in. I mean, nothing was really going for Wisconsin.
I think that this might be one of the worst defenses that D'Antonio's had in his tenure at Michigan State.
And that's what they're known for, is defense.
Yeah, no, they've been a defensive team for a long time.
You thought at least Wisconsin would be held maybe 20 points. It'd be like kind of a last-second defensive shootout. But Michigan State, 6 points. I mean, after a 36-point performance against Notre Dame.
And they didn't get in the end zone. They kicked two
field goals. Now, I think they got a touchdown and then went for 2.
Okay.
Kind of like Oregon usually does. But let's just say they needed more than 1 2-point conversion.
Do you know, was that late in the game? Was it a chunk?
It was, I think, you know what? They did kick 2 field goals. You're right about that.
So they didn't even get in the end zone. So, yeah, if you're Michigan State, obviously you have defensive questions after that game.
Yep.
And now you've got some offensive questions if you weren't able to score. But moving on to the Big 12, we got Baylor, Oklahoma State. Another game that they really didn't get a lot of time to watch. Baylor pulled it out 35-24.
It was a close game for the majority of it.
Relatively close game, and I believe that's going to put Baylor.
They're at 13th now.
They are. They're 4-0. So again, similar to Tennessee, they've done what they've needed to do. It hasn't always been pretty, but
coming in this year, you think Baylor, new coach, all that whole scandal that went down.
Yeah,
nobody really counted them as
honestly,
a real contender.
Thought Baylor was going to drop off the face of the earth.
I really did too.
I did not.
I thought they were going to be like USC after that whole scandal that went down.
Yeah,
And it was sad, but
I kind of thought that they would make go 6-6, maybe 7-5, but I did not expect a 4-0 start. They have Iowa State at Iowa State coming up this weekend. after their performance with Oklahoma State, I gave them a good chance to win it.
Yeah, I mean, and Oklahoma State should have been undefeated, you would say, coming into that game. It could have been a top 25 matchup if they beat Central Michigan.
Of course.
But, the way they usually balance their schedule out is a lot of easy cupcake games. We all know that. Baylor's known for that.
Yep.
And they get a formidable opponent and, do what they need to do and get by them. They did.
Took care of business. And then finally, the big game that we're going to look at, which went into overtime, was Washington and Arizona. This one was 35-28 in favor of the Huskies, which sets up the matchup between Washington and Stanford
on Friday
in the Pac-12 North. This coming weekend. So I think that this game kind of woke, because we talked a little bit about Arizona. Maybe
we did. It could be a trip up.
Trapping them up, but I think this will wake Washington up.
It will,
and I think that they will show up ready to play.
They got a taste of the Pac-12. Yeah. And they know what the competition's going to be.
It's a deep conference.
It is a very deep conference. That's what they're known for, top to bottom. Right. Yep. So, going forward now, we see Washington, pretty decent team. Their quarterback play was fantastic. Jake Browning had a really good game.
Yep.
They didn't make many mistakes. Running back was great. They won in overtime. All they needed to do was win. And now you set up Stanford.
They're sitting pretty. And if they beat Stanford, the case could be made.
Their schedule's easier.
Yeah.
They have a one-way track. They control their own destiny.
Now, what a lot of people don't, and what I really didn't know until I looked today, other people may not realize, but there's 4 undefeated teams right now in the Pac-12. Obviously, you have Stanford and Washington, but then you have Arizona State and Utah. All those teams are 4-0. So, in your opinion, do you think that the Pac-12 South with Utah and Arizona State isn't getting as much love as the Pac-12? Because we talked about last week, we were like, well, Stanford, Washington, that's the Pac-12.
It pretty much is, yeah.
But do you think that Utah or Arizona State can, just sneak by and go under the radar and whittle their way into the championship
I think
game?
the rankings don't do them justice. I mean, they're in their own division, thankfully. They don't have Stanford and Washington.
Right.
So they have a chance, if they keep winning, to contend for a Pac-12 championship. Right. I think they're going to need – Utah's going to have like a magical performance last year where they shot up in the rankings. They're going to have to keep winning. Obviously, they can't come into the Pac-12 championship with 2 losses. Weaker team, you would think, and have a chance to make playoff.
They're at Cal next week, which, it's a tricky game. I mean, Cal was they beat Texas. I want to say did they put 53 up on Texas?
53-45,
Something like that.
It was a lot. It was a high-scoring game.
They put up a lot of points on Texas. So we know Cal can score. And Utah got by USC 31-27. So it was a close win. It was a close win against a USC team that has been lackluster at best.
Terrible.
Yeah, it's been a rough year for the Trojans, although I feel like that's almost every year now.
Them and Notre Dame now. Both having similar years.
That makes for an interesting game at the end of the year with the Battle of the Jewel Chillela.
Might be a battle for a bowl game at that point.
No kidding, because it's been a rough road for both of those 2 squads this year. But no, Utah at Cal, I think that they will win, but I don't think it's fair to count them out of the picture too early.
They're ranked
with Stanford. You're right.
Yep.
They're 18th, and they've done what they needed to do with 4-0.
And they lost a lot of players from last year, but they're undefeated now. That's really all that matters.
Yep.
And if they can contend and possibly sneak their way in, that's great for the Pac-12 to have another team up there.
For sure. Moving on, though, we're going to look at 5 of the biggest stats from this past weekend. And Michigan, they were able to total 326 rushing yards in their 49-10 thrashing of Penn State.
And I think that's huge. I mean, Michigan, I didn't really give Michigan that much credit to start the year. I didn't really think they were deserving of their number 4 ranking.
So you were going with the overhype of Jim Harbaugh, overhype.
I think it was all about the khakis for the people ranking them. Yep.
Okay.
But now their team actually stands up. 326 yards against Penn State, who's known to be a pretty solid program. That speaks for itself. I think because their quarterback play was supposed to be great, we didn't know much about their rushing.
Well, I wouldn't call Penn State a pretty at this point. I mean, no.
In the Big Ten.
Back in the day, yeah, right. I mean, they're 2-2. Penn State is. Michigan obviously is 4-0.
It's kind of like Oklahoma State. They were kind of a decent opponent.
Right. I mean, Penn State again, I think is a consistently mediocre team. Anytime you put up more than 300 rushing yards,
and it was 49-10, so it wasn't a close game.
Exactly. Yeah. It's extremely impressive, but I don't consider that a real test.
That was a good shape up for their Wisconsin game, I think, this week.
Yes,
that was great to get their offense clicking.
A lot better after Wisconsin's drubbing of Michigan State.
We for sure are lucky they announced game day early, or else we might be looking at that.
There's a ton. I don't have them all.
There's 3 top 10 matchups this week.
Yeah, well, you even have outside the top 10. You have Ole Miss playing Georgia. Ole Miss is 16, playing number 12 Georgia. You've got number 17 Michigan State playing number 11 Wisconsin. You've got number 20 Arkansas playing. Let's see. Oh no, that was last week that they played A&M. I'm sorry, but no, you're right. There are a lot of key matchups this weekend that could have, taken the game day away from Clemson.
Thankfully, we got it. Yep.
Yeah, well, Louisville beating Florida State, I think that
definitely helped. That solidified it. You're right.
But
yep.
There's a ton of good games this weekend, and unfortunately, we're going to miss because we're doing, those game day festivities.
Well, good thing to fall back on would be game day.
Yeah,
yep.
No, for sure.
We'll get our highlights later. That's what ESPN's for.
Sure.
And then looking at the next one, Trevor Knight for Texas A&M had 382 total yards and 4 touchdowns and a win over a very good Arkansas squad that had just come off a win against TCU, looking strong.
Yeah, he played lights out.
He did, and it reminded me of when they played Alabama when he was with Oklahoma a couple years ago in the Sugar Bowl.
Yep, a little. And I mean, again, almost 400 total yards, 4 touchdowns. This game was really never close.
They pulled away.
I mean, it was pretty much like, I take that back because I think it was tied 24-24.
It was close, but A&M pulled away.
But A&M went ahead and pulled away at the very end.
And they made it look like a really convincing win.
Right. So again, now, like if you're Arkansas, that is your first loss. They're sitting at 3-1.
Yep. And they've got Bama coming up. Yeah, they're in the SEC, so it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, but I think you've got to feel like you let that one slip away.
You did, because that's your real test. Like if you beat A&M on the road, you can really start creeping your way up.
Was that on the road game, or was that was in?
Either way, I mean.
Well, it was a neutral site game, wasn't it? I think it was at Jerry's World.
Either way, I mean, you beat a top 10 team, and you're Arkansas after beating TCU.
Yeah. And A&M really, with Trevor Knight's performance, I think they solidified, okay, this is a top 10 team.
Yeah, exactly. Because last year, we kind of got the sense that they were going to be good, but then they just kind of fell off.
Right.
The whole Kenny Trill thing kind of disappeared.
Yeah, that didn't pan out.
So I think for A&M, you're really looking like you can balance out with Bama and be a real contender in the SEC.
For sure.
Yep.
It'll be an interesting matchup.
It'll be a great matchup. It'll remind you of the Johnny Manziel matchup a couple years ago against Bama.
Oh, yeah, heck of a game there. Now, looking at Dalvin Cook for FSU, they bounced back fairly well against South Florida. Dalvin Cook rushed for 267 yards and 2 touchdowns. This game, I was able to watch the first couple minutes of this game, and there were like 4 touchdowns in the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game. Like I flipped on the TV and there was like 10, 15 seconds in the game, and South Florida had already scored. They scored.
It looked like 7-on-7 practice.
First
where it's just all offense.
play from scrimmage, and then Florida State scored, and then South Florida scored, and then and for a while I was like, wow, Florida State's defense is really as bad as they looked against Louisville.
I started thinking about the question you asked me last week about, is Florida State really that bad?
Yeah, because it was ugly. I mean, granted, they ended up winning by 20, but to still give up 35 points against South Florida?
And South Florida was undefeated, and it was at South Florida. The line was 5 points. But you give up 35.
But that's practically a home game. You looked at the stadium, it was mostly Seminoles in the stands.
It was in Florida. So
I mean, I can't really say that was an away game for them. I just think that, look, we know FSU's got a good offense. We know that. Dalvin Cook, arguably the best player in college football with Dalvin Cook.
Yep.
But their defense, if you're going to give up 35, again, that as a Clemson fan, that makes me feel a whole lot better.
Oh, it really does.
About our trip down there because South Florida doesn't have a Deshaun Watson or a Wayne Gallman or Jordan Leggett.
Our offense is definitely top to bottom. I would say much better than Florida State's.
Yeah, it's much more depth.
And with our defense stepping up now, I mean,
they've played well. They've played well against Georgia. Really, we haven't. And I have some stats in here, but I'm trying to pull off the top of my head. This was the first time in Paul Johnson's tenure at Georgia Tech that he was held to less than 3 yards of play.
Wow.
So we really went in and shut him down. I think it ranks.
We're like sixth all time.
It was 6th or 7th all time in least yards allowed for a game for us. So we really played well defensively. I thought that we handled the triple option better than we ever have before.
Oh my gosh! I mean, it didn't even get going at all.
No, they were all. Defense was all over that.
Yep. We had a guy on every single player that was going to the triple option. That was really good.
Guys
really
stuck
nice
to their assignments. They didn't cheat up or they played good.
Venables had reason to be screaming.
For sure.
He was excited.
For sure. And then looking at Josh Dobbs of Tennessee, he threw for 319 yards and 4 touchdowns in that 38-28 come from behind win against Florida. So again, we talked about Tennessee a little bit. They're 4-0. They've done what they needed to do.
Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of criticism for Josh Dobbs kind of coming into it. He was kind of like Deshaun. He wasn't really doing what everyone thought he would.
Do you think he's underrated? Do you think he's not getting enough credit? I mean, 319 yards, 4 TDs.
Yeah, against the Florida defense.
Right, but I know, yes, it was a home game for him, but I feel like Dobbs is a pretty dynamic player.
Oh, I think you could argue that he's up there in the top 5 list of quarterbacks in the country with Deshaun
and
Lamar Jackson. those three guys.
Well, I think there's right now at least, based off of Deshaun's performance these first 4 weeks, Lamar he's up on it. He's on his own tier for right
He's
now.
up there. He's kind of like Bama, number one.
Well,
you would say right now.
You look at, who do you think should? If the Heisman were right now, ain't no way it's.
Well, he would obviously get it just based on numbers. Yeah.
Right, but I'm saying like if you say Lamar, Deshaun, Josh Dobbs, and Dalvin Cook. I think at this point in the season, and Leonard Fournette, I guess, but that really hasn't had a great season.
He hasn't done much. LSU's
He kind of went out in the game they played last week, and he hobbled off the field.
He's had some nagging injuries, unfortunately,
which
is for an LSU team that's struggling. You don't want to see.
But going back to the Heisman, I think right now, if the vote were held today, it'd be Lamar's. It'd be a landslide.
Now, I don't think that means he's unstoppable. I think when you look at him compared to Deshaun, it's like I said. I think it's kind of like Bama at Ohio State, where he's kind of the Bama. Everyone knows he's the best right now. And then we got Deshaun, who's we know is good. He had great numbers last year. Absolutely. And I mean, if you look at the numbers we've had compared to last year, we're kind of on track. I mean, Deshaun is a little bit less than normal, but he still has time.
There's the expectations that have been loading on him after last year.
That didn't help him at all.
It's almost impossible to match that.
And I think going back to that, like seeing his performances last year, I think a lot of people were able to look at his tape and find ways to stop him.
Right, but I'm going back to like Jameis Winston, for example, because when that year that he took him to the national championship, and that was before this game this weekend, Florida State Clemson. When we were 3, they were 5, and then we had game day. That was the biggest game in the history of Death Valley.
Yep.
Hands down, no question. Period. It was the biggest game ever, and I think most Clemson fans left that game by the middle of the third quarter. I turned off my TV. That was the first Clemson game.
It was depressing.
That I can ever remember turning off my TV and just going to bed because they drubbed us 51-14. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen this weekend.
I don't think it will.
I'm just saying when a quarterback is hot and he's young and he's just rolling. I mean, look at what Jameis did to it wasn't even a game.
That's true.
Granted, they got and this is going back to that game. They got their momentum. I think from a fumble. I think our first offensive possession, we turned the ball over.
We're going to have to start strong. That's for sure.
Well, you just have to play sound football.
Yeah.
Can't drop passes.
We can't give him room and space to take advantage of our mistakes.
Well, we know that he's going to make plays.
Yeah, we do.
But going back, like, no muff punts, no drop passes. If you're running the ball, hold on to the ball. Don't drop the ball before you cross the goal line.
Come on, Ray.
You hand the ball to the ref, because if that happens in a game like what's coming up this weekend,
every point matters.
Every play matters.
Every play matters.
Every play matters. So you've got to play fundamental sound football. You can't. It's not that they'll beat you; it's you'll beat yourself.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep.
You'll end up beating yourself before they beat you.
And I think Dabo will get us ready. I mean, we'll talk about this more later.
For sure.
I think Dabo will have us ready, and I think with the way I watched the Georgia Tech game, I thought our offense looked a lot better.
Yes.
We didn't play a full 60-minute game, but our offense definitely gave me more confidence going into this game.
A little flat third quarter, honestly.
A little flat. Second half, I don't think we scored
No. I mean, I think we honestly thought it was like in our back pocket, and we kind of slacked off a little bit.
We cruised. We did, yep.
Georgia Tech, I mean, granted, it was not really ever close, but it was just like, what are you doing? Like, just finish the game.
Yeah.
Play your 60 minutes, finish the game, get out of there before something crazy happens.
Our defense, I think, is giving me also a lot more confidence because Lamar Jackson, we know he's going to be great. We know he's going to be tough to stop, but our defense surprisingly has really stepped up, and they've played
this past game
better than our offense, I would say, this year.
I just think, though, that right now there is no greater threat in the country than Lamar Jackson. I mean,
yeah, I would say that.
I mean, the defensive performance against Georgia Tech was awesome. It was one of the best statistically in Clemson history, but you have to look at the offense that Georgia Tech, like,
it's different.
It's terrible.
It's different,
This year they're terrible.
Yeah.
So, they did great against Georgia Tech, but Louisville and Lamar Jackson that's a whole nother animal. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves because we want to talk about this game later.
I'm anxious to talk about it.
Well,
it's a big
dominating.
matchup.
I mean, this is with the fact that it's game day and it's the biggest game of the week and arguably the biggest game in the history of Death Valley, let alone Clemson football. You're always going to find a way to bring it back to the conversation. But last stat we want to look at for this past week was that Wisconsin has now beaten 2 top 10 teams in the same season for the first time since 1962, and they can make it 3 next weekend against Michigan. Do you have faith in the Badgers to beat up on the Wolverines?
Definitely more faith in the Michigan State game. You know, I've not been a huge fan of Michigan, but I think with Wisconsin's defensive performance against a Michigan State team that actually was surprisingly good on offense. Michigan's a younger team than most. They have a new quarterback this year. He hasn't really seen a real test yet. Now, Penn State was kind of a test, but it wasn't much. And they did struggle against Colorado. So I think if Wisconsin plays pretty close, if not better than the way they played against Michigan State, you could be looking at another Big Time upset.
I think it'll be great. Now that game
it's at Michigan.
It's at Michigan.
It's in the Big House.
So that's tough. But I think Wisconsin will hang with them. I see it as a lower scoring game, honestly.
We'll find out. Wisconsin's known to be having lower scoring games. 30 points was even a lot.
Yeah.
So
I think it'll be, it won't be like Bama LSU from back in the day when it was 9-6. But I think that touchdowns will be at a premium. Just my personal.
And this could be big going forward because if Wisconsin wins this game, they have a one-way track. They're you would say behind Ohio State, the kings of the Big Ten.
For sure.
If they win this game, they're already 5-0. They're looking towards the Big Ten championship, which could be against Michigan.
Well, you don't want to go in cruise control.
You don't want to go
slip up
too
against
far ahead.
a team that you shouldn't. But if you're able to get by Michigan at Michigan, that's got to boost your confidence, and you've got to feel like you should start creeping into the playoff chatter.
And that was Michigan and Michigan State was really their only two big games. They might play with Ohio State, but when you get past the state of Michigan.
Yes, but if they beat Michigan this weekend, they'll have beaten 3 top 10 teams in 5 weeks.
I haven't seen that recently.
I mean, how do you not put them in the top 5? You know what I'm saying?
You pretty much have to.
Yeah, I mean they have beaten.
They've proved themselves worthy.
I would say
if they beat Michigan.
Absolutely. If they beat Michigan at Ann Arbor and they've beaten 3 top 10 teams this season alone, I think it's criminal to not consider Wisconsin a legitimate playoff contender. I know they played terrible against Georgia State.
I know, yeah. And the way I look at it, I think LSU has to be taken a different way now. It was a top 10 game theoretically, but when you look at the teams they beat all together, like at the end of the year, you're not going to look at LSU as the top 10 team. But that being said,
they're an SEC team.
They're an SEC team, and they're known to be a powerhouse. And they beat Michigan State.
Exactly.
So remains to be seen what Wisconsin will be. So after that, we got a new segment.
We got a new segment. We're going to try this out. Basically, what we're going to do is I'm going to present 4 different topics that have taken place in the last couple of days or whatever, and Bradley's going to offer his opinions on them, and then if I disagree, I'll throw the flag on you.
Which will probably happen.
You're right. We got a little yellow flag down here, so I'll throw the flag on you, and then give my take, and then we'll go a little bit back and forth.
Try not to hit me with that flag.
Right. So first one, and we've brushed on it a little bit, but Les Miles being fired by LSU, was that the right or wrong decision?
I think after last year, the pressure that was on him to play well, I don't think it was the right decision personally. He was 114-34 all time. And I know he was not. He was kind of stubborn.
Never had a losing season.
They haven't had a losing season.
Never.
I think the lowest wins they've had is like 8.
Yeah.
Now, the talent pool in Louisiana is enormous. It's like one of the top 3 states you can get football players in the country.
Texas, Florida.
Yeah, top 4 we can say. So with that being said, you start 2-2. You lose a heartbreaker to Auburn, which let's just say they're a second away from winning that, and Gus Malzahn being out.
Right.
So if they're 3-1, you don't think he gets fired. Ed Orgeron was a great coach. He's 6-2 all time. He was at USC, went 6-2.
Yep. And coach
that's probably a fill-in. You'd think for maybe next year when they hire somebody else. I'm thinking.
Who do you hire though? Who do you hire?
Well, they talked to Jimbo Fisher. They talked to Tom Herman. Those two.
Do you really think?
But I don't think
you talk about talent pool.
Oh my gosh.
Florida is besides getting Texas.
I don't see why Jimbo would leave.
Exactly.
And Tom Herman says he loves Houston, so I don't see him leaving either.
I think Herman wants to stick around in Houston until he validates.
Maybe gets him to Big 12
as something like that.
Yeah.
Think about like Boise State, how they beat Oklahoma on that Statue of Liberty play several years back.
Chris Peterson.
Right. So that everybody was like, okay, Boise State's like for real.
That's a great comparison because Chris Peterson left him to go to Washington.
Exactly. So if Houston is able to accomplish something like that and beat a college like a royalty type team, like a Notre Dame, well not Notre Dame anymore, but like like a Michigan or a higher level college football program, I think that validates Houston, and then I could see Herman leaving.
Now, he's in Texas, which obviously there's a lot of competition there for football players.
Oh, yeah.
But it's kind of like Jimbo. He's already in a big state,
yeah.
and he's already built a program up. Do you really want to leave that?
And the people love him.
And the people love him.
They love him.
I mean, there's not a lot of pressure.
No.
He's doing what nobody thought he would do.
Oh, yeah.
They talked about Lane Kiffin coming in to LSU, which personally I would never do that.
No.
I would. That's a red flag for me.
Yeah, that's a challenge flag, is what that is.
I would be nervous. We need a red shirt for that one.
Yes. No, I wouldn't.
I would be nervous if I was an LSU fan, and if I were them, I would keep Ed Orgeron depending on how he does the rest of the year. But
I really liked him. I think it. Well, I know at USC the players loved him. The players wanted him.
the players wanted him to stay, and that's the thing. Like interim coaches never really supposed to stay.
Yeah.
And with USC, they wanted like a big name guy, so they never got him.
Dabo did. Dabo was interim head coach after Bowden. After they fired Bowden, and Dabo was, I think he was interim head coach for a little over half the season, maybe.
Yeah.
It was a while, and he did fairly well.
It was interesting though, because I was listening on ESPN today. They talked about how Bama just brought in Steve Sarkisian, who coached at USC before.
Yep.
He's kind of like an assistant to the assistant, not really doing too much. He's like video producing, but could that be a sign that maybe they're looking towards moving on from Lane Kiffin and replacing him, knowing that LSU could take him away?
Could be.
Remains to be seen. We will find out probably about a year away till we know.
Right. Now, next topic, and I know we've already kind of talked about this again. I've offered my opinion, but Notre Dame.
Do you want to throw your flag, by the way?
Yeah. Notre Dame firing their defensive coordinator. Is that the right or the wrong decision?
This is a tough one because I think Brian Kelly was right to blame the players, and I think it goes back to the head coach. I'm not a huge fan of firing guys mid-season because I think you're going to have to start all over.
Yeah,
and
that's what I said earlier.
It's restarting.
Right.
But when you let up 38 points to Duke with a backup quarterback in,
at Notre Dame,
that I can see why they did it.
It just doesn't make. It just doesn't.
I'm kind of on the fence here. Like I don't really know what to say.
You can't be on the fence.
I've never been a fan of it, so I'm going to say no. But in the back of my mind, I can see why they did it.
I haven't been able to throw my flag yet. Maybe I'll get you on this
next. Gone, yes.
Maybe I'll get you on this next.
We'll see. Yeah.
Wake Forest, they're 4-0. Are they a fluke or are they the real deal?
I want to say real deal. I really do because
Go ahead, finish.
Well, if you think about it, they beat Duke, who beat Notre Dame, and Wake. I know they haven't had the greatest schedule, but they play. Let me look at their schedule real quick just to see who they play. I don't think their schedule is overly tough.
They play FSU at FSU.
Okay.
They play us at Clemson, and then they go to. Oh no, Clemson's a home game for them, and then they travel to at Louisville.
So I take that back. Those outside of those 3 games, I think they could realistically maybe go 9-3, which I know that's a stretch. I know that's a big stretch, and you're gonna throw your flag again.
Yeah,
I know you are.
I like Wake. First off, Wake Forest 4-0. Nobody saw that coming.
Did they get any top 25 votes? They might have.
I mean, again though, you look at their wins. It's been Tulane, Duke, Delaware, and Indiana. But in the past, Wake has never been. They've never been anything to write home about. And yes, they're traveling to NC State this weekend. Yes, they could win that game, but I honestly see.
Is your question, are they the real deal in Wake standards?
Well, they're 4-0. So in Wake,
that's enough for a season for Wake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're partying right now. But do they have what it takes to compete for an ACC championship?
That I don't think so.
No.
But in terms of like possibly making a bowl
you just said
game,
they were the real deal. So you got to make up your
for
mind
Wake
here.
standards, I think they're a bigger deal than most people think they are.
They are not going to beat FSU. There is no way. Dalvin Cook will single-handedly run around them in circles. They are not going to win at Louisville. There is no way. Lamar Jackson will run around them in circles. And they host Clemson. Do you really see Clemson losing to Louisville?
I didn't see Clemson losing to Troy, and that almost happened. I know what you're saying, though. I know what you're saying.
Fair enough. But they also have Syracuse at home, Army at home, UVA at home. Again, games that they definitely could win. But in the past, would you really have picked Wake?
I wouldn't have picked them. I think they can make it closer. If they pick up a couple more wins and they're 6-1 or 6-0, I wouldn't overlook them. I think it was it last year or maybe 2 years ago? Florida State went there, I'm pretty sure, and almost lost. I mean, Wake is not a Boston College pushover. They're a middle tier ACC team. Now they're not going to contend for an
middle
ACC
tier. When has Wake Forest been middle tier? No.
I think right now they are 7, 8.
Well, that just means the ACC is weak. If Wake Forest, I got to pull up the ACC. The ACC the standings right now.
I got the standings right here. Now they're in the Atlantic, so they're obviously not going to make the ACC championship. You wouldn't think.
Yep.
But 4-0 is 4-0. I mean, you have to give that credit. They beat Indiana, who's a Big Ten team. Mm-hmm. They beat Duke, who we just kind of said they're coming back. They beat Notre Dame.
Right.
I mean, I think they're not going to get blown out. They may not win all those 3 games, but I could see them at least contending, especially if you get Clemson at home in the cold. I mean,
it's just
it could be interesting.
They're up there right now with Louisville, Clemson, and Florida State. They are not even close to any of those teams. No way. I mean, maybe they're better than Virginia, who's 1-3. But Syracuse is 2-2, BC's 2-2, NC State's 2-1. NC State is not. They're no pushover.
I wouldn't say that. No.
So as far as like competing for an ACC championship,
if that was your question, I would say no. But
they'll make a bowl game.
Well, I could see them going 8-4, 9-3, and that's great for Wake.
7-5 though.
7-5. You're going to cut them that short. They have an easy schedule outside of those big 3 games. They play Syracuse State, Army, Virginia, let's be honest here, and Boston College.
Yes, but Wake Forest has never been. So unless they're just really hot this year, maybe they can get 8 wins.
We'll find out. Maybe. If they win their next 2 games, we're bringing this question back, and you're not throwing that flag because you're going to agree with me.
I just don't see them competing for an ACC championship.
What's your next
question, though, is Pac-12, and we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but Pac-12 South, Arizona State, Utah, are they not getting as much love as they deserve as the Pac-12 North? That has Washington and Stanford in it.
We talked about that. I don't think Arizona State and Utah, I don't think they're there yet. I think Stanford and Washington are still the big boys, the kind of the bullies. Okay. But they're in their own division.
Somebody from the South has got to play the North.
Exactly. So they're in their own division.
Right.
So they have a chance to rise up like Wisconsin.
Better question then. Who do you think, between Arizona State and Utah, who do you think has a better shot at beating either Stanford or Washington?
I would say Utah. Utah, after last year, they got on the national scale. They've got some of those players returning. They don't have Devontae Booker, obviously. Their star running back, he's not back.
Yeah.
Arizona State, I don't want to say they're like Wake Forest, but they're surprising everybody. They shouldn't be here right now at this stage.
Fair enough.
I don't think they're going to continue this. I really see Utah keeping up.
So you think Utah has the best shot?
They've had a couple big wins the last couple of years, and last time Arizona State was good, let's be honest, like 8 years ago. So it's been a long time since then.
They've been decent recently, but they've never been...
to contend and beat Stanford and Washington...
Especially in such a deep conference.
In a deep conference,
conference.
I would put my money on Utah, just personally.
Okay.
They've proved themselves in the past, so we'll see. Might be wrong.
For sure. And so that pretty much wraps up that segment. Like I said, we'll kind of tweak that in later episodes and figure out exactly how we want to go. Might need to get me a red flag.
We might have to get a little review booth.
There you go. But now we'll look at one big thing from each Power 5 conference. Obviously, we'll start with the ACC. UNC and Duke, they pick up marquee wins. We've talked about Duke's win extensively.
We can keep talking about it more. This is great to talk about Duke football.
Well, nobody gave them a chance. Even after Notre Dame was 1-2, no. I was just like...
If you would have told me at the beginning of the year, Duke's going to beat Notre Dame in one sport, and it's basketball or football. Which one's it going to be?
Oh, you pick basketball. You wouldn't pick football.
You would never give them a chance against Notre Dame.
No. Not at Notre Dame.
No.
No way.
I mean, that's just embarrassing. Like, I'd love to be in that student section and just see their reaction going, Duke?
Yeah. No, we got a buddy who was a Notre Dame fan because he's from up there, and he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy with the result.
Perfect game day sign right there. Duke beat Notre Dame in football.
There you go. But then, and obviously that sets up. Well, again, going into the rest of the ACC, like Louisville, Clemson, possibly the ACC game of the year,
if not the national game of the year. For the season.
Could be, yeah.
It's the first top 5 matchup.
Could honestly be a battle of the best quarterbacks in the country.
Oh my gosh! I mean, there's a reason that when we're watching the Clemson game, the advertisement pops up: Lamar Jackson versus Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're going to see. Yeah. That's what you're paying $200 with a $60 parking ticket to go see.
Yeah, it figures to be, knock on wood, but it figures to be a great game. I think we both agree it's going to be high scoring. I don't.
We'll see.
I mean, the weather's. I checked the weather. The weather's good. I think it's going to be like high 70s and like maybe partly clouds. It's beautiful weather to be playing football.
I think the key is going to be if we get Louisville to a slow start, because their wins they've had so far, they've blown their teams out of the water from the get-go. If we get Lamar Jackson in an uncomfortable situation, which he hasn't faced yet, this is his first year being a full-time starter.
Yeah.
And our defense is solid, and Deshaun's playing well. Yeah. I think we could. It might not be as high scoring as you think, but I think we stand a chance.
No, that's viable.
We'll get more of that later. We got some stats for later. We have the Big Ten next. Obviously, the Wisconsin game was the highlight of it. Beating Michigan State, shockingly 30-6, setting up the Michigan game. Another big time matchup in the Big House. This is really kind of a moving week for both teams. This is a real first test.
There's a lot of shuffling going on right now in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, this is Wisconsin's second test. This is Michigan's real first test. So
Who do you think has more to lose in this game? You think Wisconsin has more to lose, or do you think Michigan has more? Because Michigan,
I would say Michigan, because
I agree.
If Michigan loses this game, they've got the division they're in with Ohio State and Michigan State.
Yeah.
If they lose one game, that's potentially a bubble breaker.
Well, maybe not anymore with Michigan State if their defense is lackluster at best. But especially Ohio State.
But I'm just thinking for Michigan, you lose one game, that puts a lot of pressure on you to beat Ohio State.
Oh yeah.
If you're going to win the Big Ten.
Oh yeah.
And Wisconsin plays in the other Big Ten conference or division, so if they lose one game, they got Iowa to worry about.
Yeah, and I think people undercut Wisconsin, including myself.
Oh my gosh.
After Georgia State, I was just like, how is this team ranked in the top 10? Because they were 9.
I mean, you would have to tell me that Monty Ball would have to come back and play against Michigan. And Russell Wilson for the quarterback.
It was crazy. So yeah, I agree there that Michigan definitely has more to lose.
Good question. That was good.
Yeah. And then going on to Big 12, Baylor, they're 4-0 now. They assert themselves as a contender by handling Oklahoma State. But they dropped to 2-2. Are they really are they just a contender for the Big 12 championship, or are they a contender?
Well, it's the only big contender the Big 12 has right now. I mean, Baylor, this is really helping their whole situation that they had earlier. This is kind of a way to help that and get over that hump.
Yeah.
I mean, I think their offense is still really good, even though Art Briles is gone. Their coach seems to be, continuing what they had last year.
Like Tennessee, they've done what they need to do.
They've done what they need to do.
It hasn't been pretty all the time, but they're 4-0. And
Baylor's flying under the radar. It's not like there's a huge pressure right now for them to really perform well. They beat Oklahoma State.
I agree.
If Oklahoma's not playing well, this is their year. If they're going to really make that jump, I would say to maybe contend.
Yeah.
And we called the Big 12 out a couple weeks ago, but now look at this.
Well, I still don't think they have a college football playoff contend.
Yeah.
Baylor's 4-0, yes, but really, do you see them competing with?
I wouldn't think so.
Champion?
But if you're a Big 12 team and you come into the playoff conversation with 0 or 1 losses, you have to at least consider it.
Baylor's going to lose a game. They're not going to go undefeated.
I know.
I
but
think
with
Houston.
Yeah, and that lack of a championship is really going to kill them too.
Oh yeah, we talked about it last week. They'll have one next year, finally. But for right now, their lack of a championship is.
Seth Russell's a good quarterback though. I wouldn't count him out. Their offense can hang with anybody.
So you think they could run the table?
Let me look at their schedule. Let me see what they have coming up. Because I think if they're able to get past the bigger teams in the Big 12, I'd say they have a chance. You would think. Mm-hmm. They're 13th right now. They're 4-0.
Yep.
This was their first real Big 12 game. Let's see what they got coming up. They got Iowa State. They should win that.
Yeah.
They've got
Iowa State, I believe.
It's at Iowa State, which you never know what could happen there.
Yeah.
It's at Texas after the Kansas game, which I'm just going to pencil it in for a W.
Oh, really? So you're not giving Texas?
No, I'm talking about Kansas.
Oh,
Kansas.
Kansas. I'm sorry, I thought you said Texas. And
I was going to say,
wow.
I'm throwing the yellow flag there if you're counting
no
Kansas.
love for Charlie Strong. Okay, so Kansas,
Sorry.
Yes, Kansas is a win.
They have Texas, TCU, and Oklahoma, which isn't the same as it was before. Now it's at Texas, high-powered offense.
That's a tough 3.
Texas has no defense. Let's just be honest. Notre Dame exposed them in the first week.
For sure.
They're one of those teams that has a great offense.
At Texas?
It is at Texas. That'll be tough. But like I said, they have a good offense, and they can hang with Texas's offense.
But then you have who after that?
You have TCU at home, which the last few years have been great.
The games have been, you're saying.
The games have been great,
right.
And then at Oklahoma, which despite their record, is still a tough game in Norman.
That's Oklahoma.
So I think if Baylor gets past Texas and we see that they're really looking strong, and then you come into TCU and Oklahoma, after that they have Kansas State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia.
Well, I could see Baylor winning all 3 of those games, but I can also see them losing.
I could definitely see that.
So you can either, if you're Baylor,
which means they're big wins, if you can see it like that.
I wouldn't call it a big win.
If you win all 3 of those games,
if you throttle, it's an impressive stretch where you went. Okay, they won 3 games that had significant opponents, but it's not like what Wisconsin's done.
Well, if you look at what Houston did, if you mentioned Houston being up there,
Yep.
If Baylor beats Oklahoma at Oklahoma, and Houston and Baylor coming undefeated, really though, are you really going to count Houston's conference championship as a big test?
Yeah,
it depends on if they beat Louisville. If they beat Louisville, that's a big win.
I don't see Baylor making the run, but that would make it. It would be a very interesting.
I think it's the best chance, maybe TCU, that the Big 12 has at this point.
For sure.
We'll see. Yeah. So
looking at the Pac-12 though, and obviously now we have Stanford and Washington. They pulled away late to stay on track for their top 10 matchup, and Stanford's 3-0, Washington's 4-0.
Lucky this game's on a Friday, so we can watch it.
Yes,
really happy about
watch it. Friday evening, but I still, after watching both teams this past weekend, I finally got to watch Washington. I still give the edge to Stanford.
Mm-hmm. I would give you with that one.
I just don't. I mean, I like again, Washington they've done well, but
yep. And you look at Arizona, because this was Washington. I think really one game you can look at to say, okay, are they ready for Stanford?
Yeah.
If they beat Arizona, and Arizona's quarterback Brandon Dawkins had 176 rushing yards against them.
Wow.
He's not a Christian McCaffrey.
It went into overtime.
And it went into overtime.
Yeah, that's the thing is like Christian McCaffrey.
And their running back had 97 yards. So they got 308 total yards rushing against Washington. Yeah. Now, I know it was on the road, and Washington may just have there may have been just a couple big runs, because for their quarterback, he had 13 carries for 176 yards. So big rushes there. But they're not facing Christian McCaffrey yet, and that scares you.
Yeah. That's another player you talk about for Heisman, really.
He has to be there.
So I still give the edge. I still give the edge to Stanford. I think David Shaw will have them show. They'll show up ready to play. Mm-hmm. That game is at Washington.
I think it's at Washington, which will help.
It's at Washington. Let's pull up the week.
Yes,
home. It is. It is at
home.
Washington.
Yep.
It's at Washington. That should be a good game to watch, though, especially Friday evening. And then finally, we look at the SEC. Georgia, 3-0 going into that game against Ole Miss. And they folded.
That was about 2 losses right there.
Folded like a house of cards.
Yep.
It was an ugly game. And then Tennessee is 4-0. We've talked about that a little bit.
Another test.
They're starting to kind of live up to the preseason expectations, even though they haven't played their best game.
But this could be another game you can look back on and say, hey, they beat Georgia. Yeah. We got to give them credit.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking for Ole Miss.
I'm talking for Tennessee. That's what I was talking about for Tennessee.
Okay,
if they beat Georgia,
I got you.
Because
that's who they're playing this.
They played.
Tennessee is playing at Georgia this weekend.
Yeah.
And especially with how Georgia performed against Ole Miss, I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, wouldn't be surprised to see Tennessee come in motivated.
And Josh Dobbs is a better quarterback in my mind than Chad Kelly.
Yeah, and just come in and run all over Georgia.
Yep.
That'd be a tough couple losses for the Bulldogs.
Yeah,
Kirby Smart started out 3-0, and then all of a sudden you lose to Ole Miss and Tennessee.
It probably makes him want to go throw up after letting up 45 points. You didn't see that a lot again.
Well, then you're pretty much out for the SEC championship.
They're done.
You're done.
I mean, you didn't expect them to really be up here his first year.
Yeah.
So if they get like an 9-3 year, I'd say that's.
The expectations in Athens
it's huge.
Are always high.
It's huge.
That's like Baton
He knew that going into it though.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. That would be a tough couple of weeks if you're a Bulldogs fan.
Yep.
So, but now we'll look at the upcoming week preview. Do some picks and analysis of top 25 team games, starting at 25, working our way down to number 1. And the first matchup that we have, and I know we just talked about it a second ago, is Georgia hosting Tennessee. We've really already kind of touched on that, the fact that we see Tennessee coming in motivated to play.
Yep, and I think if you look back at what Florida did, to be the first half, if Georgia can replicate that, because Nick Chubb, great running back.
Oh, yeah.
You never count him out. I know Georgia got blown out. I know they're 3-1 now. They had a big loss.
Well, they dropped 13 spots. And that was the big mover this week. I mean, Michigan State did drop 9 to 17th, but Georgia plummeted from 12 to 25th. It's a wonder they're still in the top 25.
Just because they're Georgia.
Well, yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
But, I think Tennessee, this isn't an automatic win. But if Josh Dobbs continues the way he played last week and exposes Georgia like Jack Kelly did, Nick Chubb's going to have to go off.
Well, we've talked about Ole Miss, and when Ole Miss is clicking, I think they're just as dangerous as Louisville.
They're not a team that someone wants to see when they're competing for a championship.
They are, when they're clicking. Now, when they're off, they're off.
Yep.
They're really off.
Yep.
But
reminds me of Panthers.
Yeah. Well,
hate to bring that up again, but
yeah, horrible game against the Vikings. But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, as far as Ole Miss goes, when they're hot, they're out there.
And we got Boise State against Utah State.
Broncos back in the top 25.
There you go. We talked about it earlier. Boise State's still hanging around.
3-0, yep. They beat a Pac-12 team, Oregon State.
They're one of those teams like San Diego State and Houston that are not in the Power 5 that snuck their way in. So, should be a pretty good game with Utah State. It is at home. They should win it.
Now, I'm looking at their schedule, and they have Utah State, then they play UNM, that is New Mexico. So they play New Mexico, then they have Colorado State, BYU, at Wyoming, San Diego State, at Hawaii, and then they host UNLV and travel to Air Force.
That San Diego State game could be huge because San Diego State is in the exact same conference, and they're 19th right now.
I mean,
there's no big wins. There's no big wins on there.
No,
sadly.
But here's the thing: is like let's just play theoreticals for a second. Houston runs the table. Boise State runs the table. What do you do with Boise State? Where do you put them?
You have to put them top 10. I mean, they go undefeated.
Really? Top 10?
Well, they went undefeated. I mean, that enough.
Against Wyoming, New Mexico,
well,
and Utah
look at when they
State?
were good a few years ago. They went 13-0, and they were number 5 in the country.
There were several years they dominated for several years before they even had the opportunity to play, and I think it was
They beat
Sugar
Oregon
Bowl.
State, a Pac-12 team.
A weak Pac-12
I know they're
team.
weak.
A weak.
But I think if you go undefeated and you win every game on your schedule, no matter who you play.
But top 10?
Okay, maybe top 15. Is that better
That's
for you?
fair.
Top
That's
15?
fair. Okay,
That's better. Does that make you more comfortable?
Yes, I won't throw my flag for top 15. I mean,
it won't
there
really
are no
matter in the
impressive
long
wins.
run. They'll play in like a the Sun Bowl or something. They won't be.
They might get something bigger than that. If they're undefeated in their top 15, I could see a Big Six.
Maybe.
New Year's Six. I could see New Year's Six.
Because they usually like to have one out of Power 5 team, and if Houston.
But then, if Houston's undefeated, and in my mind, again, we talked about it last week, but in my mind, if Houston goes undefeated, I think this is the year, a non-Power 5. It was either Notre Dame or Houston. Notre Dame is absolutely
They
out
have
of the
no
picture.
chance.
Absolutely out of the picture. So I think Houston, if they run the table, they might get a playoff berth, and I think if Boise State, beats.
It depends. If there's a lot of teams out there that have like 2 losses and 3 losses, Boise State could sneak in.
Possibly.
They saw how Oklahoma State played.
I don't know though, because Oklahoma State, they're 2-2, but the Central Michigan game should.
They're like 3-1.5.
Right. So they're really 3-1. Their first loss was at Baylor, and it really wasn't a bad loss, but I don't.
My money would be on Texas, just personally.
I don't know. I think because it's at Oklahoma State, I think that the 2-2 is deceiving.
It is.
It's not.
I think you just look at the team. You don't look at the records.
They're better than 2-2.
So you going pokes?
I'm going Cowboys.
All right.
Cowboys for that
Sounds
game.
good. Fair enough.
TCU at 21. They are hosting Oklahoma. Several years ago, this would have been a huge game.
Last game, this was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to Oklahoma had their season survive because of that knockdown they had against TCU last year.
Yep.
So it's at Oklahoma.
No, it's TCU.
Or it is at
hosting.
TCU.
Yep,
Right, it's at
TCU's
TCU.
hosting.
I think you throw records out the door here, especially with Oklahoma. They're 1-2.
Yeah.
But TCU, I really think.
They're 3-1 for a reason.
I think Oklahoma, the reason they were losing their games is because they were facing really good quarterbacks. That's kind of how we saw last year. They faced Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
And TCU last year had their backup quarterback in.
Yep.
And was still able to almost beat Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So I think now that you have Kenny Hill and he's proven himself, and they did lose to Arkansas, but they're still a decent team. And I think Gary Patterson has what it takes to take over Bob.
So you're taking the horn.
I'm going to take TCU.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think the wagon wheels continue to fall off for the Sooners. I mean, honestly,
Which does not disappoint me at all.
I love Bob Stoops. Well, I love Bob Stoops, but I just don't. I don't see him hanging around.
They really don't get a break. I mean, they got
I'm a
rough stretch.
Pull up their schedule really quick. At TCU, they host Texas, host Kansas State. At Texas Tech, then they go Kansas. That's an easy win.
Finally get an easy game.
Yeah, but then they host Baylor at the end of the year, which could shape up to be a good game if Oklahoma turns it around.
That's huge for Baylor.
If Oklahoma turns it around.
Baylor too, because they need to win that game.
But I mean, if you lose, even if they were to run the rest of their, let's say they lose to TCU and they're 1-3, and they win the rest of their games up until Baylor, you're still going to have that. Bob Stoops is going to be on the hot seat.
Oh, yeah.
After a 1-3
yeah.
start, I mean, he's been around forever.
I mean, he had a good year last year, but Oklahoma had always been ranked like top 10 and always finished like 8-5.
Oh yeah. The expectation is, Heisman championship.
They're huge. They're like Notre Dame.
Game.
Exactly. So Arkansas, we don't need to talk too much about this. They're playing Alcorn State. Alcorn State has a great band. They don't have a great football team.
Yeah, I'm going Razorbacks on that.
Yeah, we'll both agree on that one.
San Diego State.
Now they play at South Alabama, which
trap game.
I think for.
Can you name the South Alabama mascot? Can you name it?
Are they the Bulldogs?
No, they are the.
Please say the Bulldogs.
The Jaguars.
Jaguars. Dang it.
The Jaguars. So you think South Alabama, they have a chance?
The only reason I think they don't have a chance is because it's weird. The way that I see it, I think they don't have a chance because they beat Mississippi State. And now San Diego State is saying, wait a minute.
All their luck has run out.
Wait a minute. It's like an NCAA tournament team. Think about that.
Okay.
When Middle Tennessee beat Michigan State, people were like, wait a minute.
Screwed my bracket.
We need to actually pay attention to this team.
Right.
And Syracuse destroyed Middle Tennessee State.
Yep.
It wasn't even close. So now it is at South Alabama, so they might actually draw like a full house.
That's a long road game for San Diego State.
I know.
At South Alabama?
Yeah,
Who scheduled that?
I mean, they're paying money to go there. Think about that.
Wow. I'm going to go San Diego State.
I think their running back play will be the difference. I think they will take care of South Alabama like they should. But if they lose that game,
oh boy,
can you imagine South Alabama 2 wins against San Diego State and Mississippi State?
Well, Mississippi State's terrible. They're terrible.
SEC. They're SEC.
They are,
That's
but
all you
they're
need to
terrible.
know.
San Diego State's 3-0 right now, but I don't see that.
Now Utah at Cal after that. That is potentially for Utah.
Yeah,
that's huge.
A big game because they would be at they'd be at 5-0 after that if they were to get by with a win again. They had a close win against USC last week, 31-27. Do you believe in the Utes? Do you think they can get it done on the road?
Well, they gave up 27 to USC after USC had really struggled. They've had a lot of close games. Now they beat their first game. They won 24-0. They almost lost to BYU.
Who'd they play that first game?
Oh gosh, SUU.
Oh, okay.
So Southern Utah.
Okay, so
Southern Utah.
Okay.
Well, we won't even talk about that.
Right. Yeah.
They played BYU.
Now BYU's fallen off a little bit.
They have. I think Tanner Mangum is their quarterback, I believe.
Okay.
He's actually not bad. So when they face a good quarterback, they seem to make it real close. So I think Cal, with their great offense, has a chance to beat Utah.
Cal can score.
Because Davis Webb is a flat-out player.
Yeah, they can score.
I mean, he can throw the ball.
Yeah.
So Utah's definitely going to have a great defensive plan for Cal, and it's on the road.
Yeah, I honestly feel like I feel like Cal can get it done. I feel like Utah is going to come in and they're just it's going to be a shootout, and I give the nod to Cal. I think Cal
just based on offense and how Utah really hasn't proved anything yet. I would say I agree with you there.
Okay.
Yep.
And then looking at a Big Ten matchup, you have Michigan State on the road at Indiana. They're coming off a bad loss to Wisconsin.
They plummeted.
We've covered in detail, right? They dropped 9 spots. They lost 30-6. I think they rebound though at Indiana.
I would think so.
I think they rebound.
And Indiana's, potentially a trap game. I don't think so, because Michigan State, their offense usually isn't too strong. So when you rely a lot on your defense and someone breaks through, you never know. I would give the nod to Michigan State there.
Yeah, I think Old Sparty.
They'll be favored by double digits.
For sure.
It would be shocking though if Indiana won.
Then looking at 16 Ole Miss, they host Memphis.
Revenge game right there.
Well,
Memphis beat them last year.
Look at this. The game that Memphis played over the weekend.
You talked to me about this one. Yeah.
Bowling, it was like I turned on the game and it was 56-3 at the half. They ended up beating Bowling Green 77-3.
That's zero sportsmanship.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, they haven't played anybody. They've played Bowling Green. They've played Kansas, and then they have played Southeast Missouri State, who they beat 35-17. So
Memphis is going to have to bring Paxton Lynch back.
Right. They haven't played anybody. So do you think that Memphis are they just going to get flattened by Ole Miss, or do you think what if Ole Miss doesn't show up to play on offense?
I was going to say if they do show up to play on offense, it could be like your Florida State, South Florida game where it's like 55-35 and just a complete shootout.
Yeah. Because after that Bowling Green game, I feel like Michigan can.
But with Ole Miss is not your typical 16th ranked team. Excuse me.
Yeah.
They were a really decent team, and if they would have played 60 minutes the whole year.
Clicking though, when they're off, they're terrible.
And they should click against Memphis. Memphis doesn't have that great of a defense.
It's at home for Ole Miss. I feel like it's a game that it's Ole Miss's to lose.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like Memphis may feel like they have a chance, but Ole Miss should win that game.
Yep. You would think.
It shouldn't be an issue.
Now Nebraska plays Illinois.
Nebraska's been quiet. They're 4-0, top 15.
15. I've always been a Tommy Armstrong fan. Nobody,
really?
People really throw him under the under the bed. People have really hated on him.
I was a Bo Pelini fan.
Tommy Armstrong, if you just look at the way he plays, now I know you don't want to typically call him a dual threat quarterback, but he can throw the ball downfield and he can run. So that alone, I mean, they beat Northwestern. They had a pretty solid game.
Right.
He's an experienced player. And this game shouldn't be that big a deal. I don't think they'll really struggle.
I don't even think Nebraska could be. I mean, they could have half the talent that they have now, and I think they could still be Illinois.
They got the ex-Bears coach.
Lovie Smith is
coaching Illinois now, but
Illinois may be on the rebound.
They're a while away from. This isn't the Illinois team that went to the Rose Bowl a few years ago.
No. I mean, they're 1-2. They lost bad to UNC, and then I think they played Western Michigan, and they lost 34-10.
Nebraska should take care of business at home.
I don't see this even.
It makes them 5-0.
I could see this being another 77-3 game, honestly.
It makes them 5-0, and that makes them and Wisconsin your two teams to watch out for in the other Big Ten division.
For sure. And then moving on, we got an ACC matchup. Miami at 14. They travel to Georgia Tech. I would have called, and Miami's 3-0. I would have called this a trap game, but after watching the Clemson performance against Georgia Tech and the fact that Mark Rick has had a week off to prepare, I mean, they had a bye week.
That always helps against the triple option week off.
I think Miami does fine. I think they come in, even though it's at Bobby Dodd, I think they win.
And they got Brad Kaya back, who he's had a week to rest, so he should be good to go.
Yep.
I just think all they got to do is watch the Clemson tape and really just replicate that, and they should be able to stop the triple option.
Even then, though, honestly, I mean, that was the worst offensive performance.
Georgia Tech just had nothing going. They were playing golf out there. They had a negative 1 yards in the first quarter.
Something yard or -3 passing yards, I think, obviously, because they never passed the ball. But yeah, their rushing game was it left much to be desired for sure.
And then we talked about Baylor at Iowa State, which I think TCU, was it last year or the year before that, actually struggled at Iowa State, which shocked everybody.
Yeah.
So Iowa State, they got nothing to lose. They're coming to this game really just Baylor's their Super Bowl.
Right.
You could say that.
Right.
I think Baylor should be fine.
Yeah.
This isn't basketball. Iowa State shouldn't struggle with, or Baylor should not struggle with that.
I agree. And then you have another ACC matchup with Florida State at 12.
Now, before we get to that,
okay,
we polled 50 kids, and if anyone's watching out there, we really appreciate you guys getting your vote.
Because you went around the dining halls today and got.
I went around court lunch, polled 40 people, and gave them 5 games, one from each conference. Who do they think is going to win?
So this is the CSP, the Clemson student poll.
It's our version of the FBI.
There you go.
Yep.
It actually makes sense.
This one actually is reasonable. Yeah. So without knowing who picked who, if I was going to tell you that UNC had a 25% chance to beat Florida State, would you say that's too high or too low?
I'd say that's too low.
Too low?
Too low.
What's your reasoning with that?
Florida State.
It's Florida State.
Their games,
it's at Florida State.
It is, but I still don't.
And UNC is, after that win against Pittsburgh, they're riding high.
Yeah.
Mitch Trubinsky playing well.
I still don't have much faith in Florida State. If you look at their defensive performance against Louisville, if you look at their defensive performance against South Florida, not saying UNC should win that game. I don't think UNC has over a 50% chance. It's not a toss-up game, but give UNC a little bit more.
And I'd be interested to see what the FBI said, because our CSP, 5% chance.
Wow,
UNC.
So they were doing the tomahawk chalk.
You got to chop off your 2 on your prediction there. It's only 5% chance.
That's
2
surprising.
people voted for UNC.
That's surprising.
And maybe just out of pressure to finally have someone put down UNC.
Yeah.
So
most people think the Seminoles are going to win then.
I think just based on name, Florida State versus UNC, people just decided to go with the Noles.
I think UNC's not getting as much credit as they deserve, honestly.
We'll see. Florida State's defense has not been good. UNC's offense, you never know.
Another top 25 matchup. You got Tennessee at 11. They are traveling to number 25 Georgia. I know we've already talked about this game a good bit. What it means for both teams. So we can probably go ahead and skip that.
Also on the CSP.
Oh yeah.
Did a vote with that.
We did this game too.
We did this game too.
Okay.
And I honestly thought it would be a lot closer. I really did.
Okay. So lay the percentages on me then.
Take a guess at what percentage. Do you think Tennessee is over or under 75%?
We're going to go with under.
Under?
Yeah.
You're right, 68%.
Okay.
Which I thought it would be a lot closer, to be honest, just because Georgia was ranked and they're 3-1. Now, I think people are...
they're down on Georgia.
They're short-minded looking at the Ole Miss game and saying, okay, Ole Miss destroyed Georgia, so Tennessee should do the same.
Right.
I just thought it'd be a lot closer to me personally.
So you think it's a toss-up game?
Is it at Georgia, right?
It is at Georgia, yeah.
It's at Georgia. Nick Chubb. It's Georgia. And Tennessee hasn't really...
What does it mean? That's just like saying, it's Florida State. That goes back to that first poll, and people are just like, it's Florida State, so they got to beat UNC because UNC's always not, you know what I mean? Like, you can't...
But Tennessee struggled with Florida. I mean, with Florida, with a backup quarterback and not really that much going for them. I mean, they were hanging around the top 25, weren't really that great a team.
I still think that Tennessee should win that game. It shouldn't be...
They should.
It should maybe be close for a couple quarters or so.
I would say 60-40 at least. But that's just me personally.
Maybe,
I don't know.
Maybe. Next game, though, and one that we've talked about a good deal, obviously, top 10 matchup, we have Washington hosting number 7 Stanford. Now, you do another poll on this one?
Did a poll. This will shock you.
Okay.
I'm just going to say, I don't think anybody knew that Washington was number 10 just because I didn't put that on the actual list.
Okay.
Because you will never get it right. I'm just going to go out and say,
yeah.
The same amount of people voted for UNC as they did for Washington.
So
2 people voted for Washington.
So what was the percentage then?
5%.
So 5% give the nod. And, honestly, like...
People are riding Stanford pretty high.
I am too. I mean, I'm not saying it's 95-5 or whatever, but I give Stanford at least an 85% chance to win that game. I don't have that much faith
at
in
Washington. I mean, if you shut down McCaffrey...
it's at Stanford.
It's at Washington.
Well, then ESPN has it wrong. You sure? You sure it's not?
Washington first is number 7
you're right,
Stanford.
You're right.
All right.
Okay.
So we got that. It's at Washington. It's a top 10 matchup. Washington's coming in. They're going to fill the place. And they're going to zone in on McCaffrey. They might not win.
But even if you double team and triple team McCaffrey, that's not going to eliminate the other threats on the field.
They have a new quarterback who's been decent. He hasn't faced. I mean, he did face UCLA.
So you're thinking that the new quarterback in a new system, in a hostile environment, in a packed stadium, is what's going to trip up Stanford?
Top 10 matchup if McCaffrey doesn't do as well as usual. If he's held to maybe 97 yards and like a score.
Gotcha. So
if it's a close game, I think you'd be nervous for Stanford. And 5%, that's doing Washington dirty.
I don't know, man. I mean,
I think if I put the numbers down in front of them, it'd be a lot different.
On Stanford.
They almost lost to UCLA.
This is true.
So,
though, looking at the next game, we got number 6 Houston, and they are hosting Connecticut. Do we even need to talk about this game?
Houston should roll over. They will Greg Ward them.
It's Connecticut.
It's UConn, and UConn actually. I think it was last year, was their only loss. Houston's only loss.
Really?
So this is revenge game, and if this happens again,
no, not going to happen.
Houston will never forgive UConn for anything.
No, they're 4-0. They're at 6. It's a home game for them.
They get another Thursday night game, which really surprises me. They get back-to-back Thursday night games. No, they played Texas State. So this is their second Thursday night game in 3 weeks for Houston.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So with that, UConn, when you have a Thursday night game, I think it's a lot more eyes on Houston, a lot more pressure.
Well, yeah, they need that.
It's a night game. You fill the place.
If they're going to try and get in the conversation for a playoff berth, if they run the table,
that's true.
They need that. They need the exposure.
I was just talking for UConn's sake. Might have a little more on their side, a little more of an edge.
Possibly. And then obviously at number 5, Clemson's taking on Louisville in Death Valley. We'll get to that game in just a second. Moving to number 4, Michigan. They are hosting Wisconsin. And we've talked about this game a little bit. Who has more to lose here, and what are the implications in the Big Ten?
And what percentage do you think Michigan was picked to win?
Home game, I'm going to go with at least 70%.
You're very close, 67%. 2/3 of people voted for Michigan.
Okay.
Reasonable choice. Wisconsin's the lower team.
Yeah.
And Michigan.
Their performance against Georgia State probably still lingers in the backs of some.
A little bit. The Michigan State game definitely helps, but remains to be seen. And then Ohio State Rutgers. I think they struggled last year with Rutgers for like a half.
But they're not.
But JT Barrett, he's learned from that.
It's
they
a home
should be
game,
good.
and they're coming off a bye week. if they're not prepared for
Rutgers has no chance.
off a bye week.
Rutgers' AD might want to shotgun a few more beers because he's going to have to forget this game.
I don't think this is even close.
And then Bama, Kentucky shouldn't even be close. Same.
Kentucky beat South Carolina.
But they beat South Carolina.
I know.
Come on.
I just want to throw that out there.
That was just a shot at South Carolina.
Yeah, that's all that was. But no, Bama.
It should be the same as the Ohio State game.
They played Kent State last week. They did fine, 48-0. They're going to do the same thing to Kentucky. I don't see that particular game being close. But now that we've had a chance to look at the other top 25 games, we're going to move on to the big game this weekend.
Game everyone's been waiting for.
Which is the game of the year. If you're a Clemson fan, obviously it's game day's coming, 8 o'clock, ABC. Primetime football.
Deshaun versus Lamar doesn't get much better than that.
The stakes could not be bigger.
Doesn't get much bigger than that.
Looking at the history, because Louisville and Clemson have only played each other twice before.
2014 was the first game.
Yeah, exactly. So they've only played each other very recently. Now Clemson is 2-0 in those games, but each time they've played,
it's been close.
They've gotten their money's worth.
The first game was 23-17. I think a couple last second plays did it, and then last year.
That was the year that Deshaun went out with that injury. It was a home game for Clemson.
You're right. Yep.
But Deshaun went out.
Cole Stout saved the day.
Right. Well, it was a last-second goal line stand by the Tigers that ended up winning that game for us.
And last year, kind of the same thing. We intercepted the ball at the goal line.
Yeah. Well, the whole game was defensive. I mean, they had. I'm looking here. They had 22 first downs in the entire game on both sides. Total of 22 first downs, only 124 yards rushing, and only 493 yards of total offense.
Wow.
They combined for 3 and 33 on third downs, and they had 22 punts in the game.
Kind of what I thought that Wisconsin-Michigan State game would be.
Yeah, so, that game in 2014 was extremely defensive. And then 2015, when Clemson went to, Papa John's Stadium and won 20-17.
People kind of they were a little nervous for Clemson at that point. They were like, okay, they just played Louisville, who was 0-2 at the time.
That was honestly, I thought we were going to lose that game for a while.
I thought we did too, and that was my first, I'd come into Clemson never really cheering for them. I'd never really been a big Clemson fan.
Right,
so when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, is our season going to end right here?
Yeah.
Am I going to have to start cheering for Duke again?
Yeah. And although there is a very short, brief history between these two schools, both times that they've matched up, it's been within 7 points.
Yep.
And so,
low-scoring game. You wouldn't think that would happen again this year?
No.
Because Lamar Jackson, did he play last year? I don't think he did. I think they had another quarterback in.
No, I don't think he played last year.
He might have. I think he came in second half, actually.
Yeah, because last year, Clemson's defense held Louisville's offense to just 272 total yards. They had only 19 rushing yards last year.
Louisville did?
Louisville only had 19 rushing yards.
Lamar Jackson will get that on the first play of the game, probably.
Yeah, honestly, I think that this game is going to have more plays of 20-plus yards than any game.
Oh yeah,
the rest of the year. It's
going to be a nice environment. The weather won't be bad because last year Notre Dame was.
Oh, it was a monster.
It was like the Baylor TCU game where you couldn't move the ball to save your life.
No, it was just pouring down rain. No, it would be great weather for football. And I don't see either offense struggling, except maybe Louisville because of the noise, because Death Valley will be.
Death Valley's going to be rocking.
Extremely
and
loud.
I think Clemson has had a chance now to look at Lamar Jackson and do a little bit of video look on him. Yeah. We might not be able to stop him from that, but I think it'll at least limit maybe a little bit his potential against us.
Even without, nobody's done it yet, so I just don't.
Florida State.
Go into the game going, okay, we're going to limit Lamar Jackson, or we're going to shut him down.
It's easier said than done.
Yeah, well, with Washington with Christian McCaffrey, you can talk about it all day long, but doing it is a totally different thing.
Yeah.
So, I think that this is going to be a shootout, and I think the only way Clemson wins this game is by scoring a lot of points.
They're really going to have to be clicking on all cylinders offensively.
A lot of points, regardless of how the defense plays. And it might come down, it might be one of those games where a kickoff return for a touchdown or a muff punt.
You're looking at the Alabama game right there from last year. That's what changed the game.
Key play, 1 or 2, 3, 4 key plays will determine the outcome of the game if they're able to match each other.
Now, I did look at this one stat. It was about our linebackers, and I know, that's only a few defensive guys, but that could, when you rush linebackers, kind of like when Luke Kuechly, when he's a factor and you're a linebacker and he's a factor like Ben Boulware, you can rush the quarterback, force him out of the pocket, force him to make errant throws. And our linebackers, I think the stat was like
Well, we've had a sack in the last, I think last week was the last 33 games, and we had a sack obviously against Georgia Tech, so I think it's now 34. But yeah, I mean, going back to what you were talking about with linebackers, were you able to find the stat? About
it was something like we've already had 3 interceptions for linebackers, and we had like 2 all last year.
Oh, wow.
So if you add that pressure, alongside, our secondary might not be as strong as usual because they're a little bit younger.
Yep.
But if you add that, next level presence, you can rush the quarterback, guard the wide receivers better. I just think our defense deserves a lot of credit.
Well,
I think we have a chance.
For sure, we definitely have a chance. When it's at home and it's at night like that, it's going to be extremely loud, and obviously the defense, that's an advantage for the defense when it's so loud that you can't even hear. So, I mean, I'm sure Louisville is, trying to devise the best strategy for play calling, whether it's called 3 or 4 at a time in advance.
Yep.
Because, it's going to be extremely loud.
It really is. I mean, the noise factor is going to be huge.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because they played Florida State at home. And kind of going back to that, that's what I was going to bring up. The Florida State game, I think when you look at that one, yes, they got blown out, but I think Louisville just established their presence early, and Florida State didn't even try and come back. That game should have, let's just say realistically, should have been like a 20, maybe.
Well, that goes back to the
game.
2013 game, which was before this game this weekend. It was
really going to bring that up?
Got to.
Yeah.
Biggest game in Death Valley history, where the Seminoles came in and Jameis Winston, who was a hot young quarterback, and you know the rest.
And people say history repeats itself. We'll see. I have more faith in us.
I don't doubt that Clemson will show up to play. I think that this squad will show up to play. I think that this will be a competitive game. I don't think it'll be decided really until the fourth quarter. But added pressure of game. I mean, this is only the 5th time that CollegeGameday has come to Clemson.
That always adds pressure.
Right. Clemson's 3-1 in those games. Obviously, the loss to Florida State was the only loss that we've had. We've won
18 in a row at home.
Yeah, which I think is a school record.
It is a school record, yeah.
18 at home is a school record.
It's hard to get more than that.
Well, Florida State right now holds, I think they're number 1 in the nation. They have 22.
Hopefully we can end that streak later.
Travel to Florida State. So,
we do. Let's not get carried away. Let's get past Louisville first.
For sure.
Yep.
But being able to end that streak would be a really, really cool thing.
Now, what are you thinking, score-wise? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's an offensive shootout. I don't think that there's. As far as like a specific number, I mean, I would go. I could see something in the range of 38-31. Maybe a field goal or here or there, but it's touchdown, mostly touchdowns.
What do you think it's going to come down to? What main portion?
I think it's going to come down
outside of the offense
to key either mistakes or just key impact plays on special teams and defense, because. Obviously we know Louisville, we know Clemson's offense are, spectacular, they're loaded. But if there's a linebacker has an interception, or there's a muff punt, or there's a kickoff return past midfield, whatever the case may be.
And I think it's better because our special teams this year has been a lot better already than last year.
Exactly, and those kinds of plays really get the crowd into the game.
Oh yeah, and that could change the atmosphere completely.
If you can keep the crowd in the game, if you're Clemson, because you know what Louisville's going to try and do. They're going to try and come out, and they're just going to,
They're going to try and blow us out of the water from the very beginning.
Well, they're going to try and quiet the crowd,
yep.
right? They're going to either come out on, if they win the toss, I could see them receiving. And they're just going to try and come out on offense, score, and look back at Clemson and go, you got to catch up to us.
Yep. They've got 63.5 points a game, which is
leads the nation.
That would be a record if the season ended today.
Leads the nation.
And looking at this, they've got 9 yards a game per play, 7 yards per rush, almost 8 pretty much.
Yeah.
And our run defense relatively has been pretty good. Now Auburn is no juggernaut. Georgia Tech is different.
Yeah.
But I think our run defense just on the line, you got Dexter Lawrence, you got the rest of the guys there have really stood their ground well.
Well, our total defense right now is ranked 3rd. I mean, we're only allowing 218 yards per game. We're 2nd in pass efficiency defense and 2nd in yards per play allowed, which we allow less than 3.5 yards per play.
We guard the pass well, we guard the rush well.
Right, but you also have to look at who we've played.
That's true.
Because if you're playing Georgia Tech and you can stop the triple option.
But I think you also have to look at who Louisville's played. I mean, Florida State, in my mind, that was kind of a fluke, just because Florida State just completely got destroyed.
You really think it was a fluke?
I wouldn't say more of a fluke, but just like the offensive production. Florida State was just completely taken out of the game. I think if you played that game again, it would be a lot closer on like a neutral field. Florida State should have been a lot closer than it would have been. So, like, a lot of those offensive numbers, they did score 63 points, but that was without Derwin James, and Florida State was just the air was out of the bubble.
They didn't show up to play. I don't think. I mean, you can get beat by 21 and be like deflated on the sideline, but when you get beat, like when you're losing 63-10, I mean, it was just like, who is on the field? I mean, who took the field for Florida State? Because it was never competitive. It never looked like Florida State was they even showed up. So I
have faith that our offense will show up. I think it really will come down to defense. And from what I've seen, I know we haven't played strong opponents, but from what I've seen, our defense will not stop Lamar Jackson, but at least contain him, you would think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look, and this is just going back to some of the history, like top 15 matchups in Death Valley, we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This will be our 11th matchup, and we're 4-6 in our previous 10. We've beaten North Carolina in '82. We beat Georgia Tech in 2006. That was our first game day. That was a matchup, I think, number 12 Clemson, number 13 Georgia Tech. We dominated that game 31-7. Then we beat Georgia in 2013, obviously the season opener, and then Notre Dame last year.
Sweeney's 9-5 against top 10 teams.
Yep. So, and he got his 50th ACC win last week, which puts him, I believe, at 7th all time. And we've talked about, like, you go in the statistics of like Clemson's defense versus Louisville's offense. Clemson's only given up 11 points a game.
Yeah, I mean, well, that kind of goes back to who we played, I would say.
Exactly. So some of these stats
let's not look too much into the numbers.
Well, what I think you can look at, in my opinion, regardless of who you play, is turnovers.
Oh, yeah.
And we're 9th right now. And
now, 3 of those picks, I think, were against Troy in the first half.
Possibly. Yeah.
So, we played South Carolina State too. They had a bunch of turnovers.
Right.
But I see what you're saying.
Right.
Our turnovers
but I mean,
great.
Louisville is 116th in turnovers right now. Their offense has not done a stellar job of handling the ball. So, again, that goes back to impact plays. And if you're Clemson and you're looking at that and you're going, okay, Louisville's got Butterfingers. If you strip a couple balls, if Louisville's driving down the field and they're almost in red zone territory and you they throw a pick or force a fumble.
It just takes them completely out of the rhythm.
Boom! All of a sudden, you've got momentum. The crowd's back into the game.
Yep.
And if you're Louisville, you're starting back at square one.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, we cannot let them get out and get comfortable, calm the crowd down, and really establish themselves. We got to make Lamar Jackson comfortable. That's really the basis of the game.
For sure.
That's what I would say.
For sure.
So I'm confident in our team. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go on ahead and pick Clemson, no bias.
Right. Yeah.
At home, game day. I think we've proven ourselves to be the better team since last year. Mm-hmm. We have the better, I think, top to bottom roster outside of Lamar Jackson. I think we, match up with them very well at most positions.
Yeah, I agree. I think Deshaun will get in his group because we really haven't seen him play to his.
Yeah, I mean, and the Louisville last year wasn't really that good. No, you can't look at the past too much.
You don't want to look at that too much. I'm telling you, man, that Florida State game. That was
Jameis Winston, though. I just think about that.
No. This year.
Oh, you're talking about this game.
This year, Louisville, Florida State, that was not a fluke.
I wouldn't look too much into it completely because Florida State, their defense it's not good, dude. I think our defense is better than Florida State's, to be completely honest.
Yes.
Which is saying something because we're super young.
Home for Louisville, I will pick Clemson because I do think that the atmosphere will make the difference. I think that it's statistically unlikely for a team to come into Death Valley and get a win. And I think that everyone on the team, Dabo, Deshaun, all those guys, realize the gravity of the game.
This is make or break.
And I was, at Gallman's presser earlier today, and also, Jeff Scott and all those guys were showing up, Deshaun, and they were saying, they all repeated that we play this game like it's a national championship. One game at a time. Mm-hmm. One game at a time. This is the game that we're all focused. We're not looking at Florida State. We're not looking at focus.
One thing I just thought of, which I think, it may help a little bit just mentally. Clemson's this year has had so much pressure on them from the outside, supposed to be the best team.
Oh, yeah.
You got a team like Louisville now who's ranked higher than you.
Yep.
We're not supposed to win this. I think if you play like that chip on your shoulder like we had last year, that could help.
That hasn't really been Dabo's motivational technique this year. I think they had like some mantra at the beginning of the season. It was like embrace the target. Basically,
I think you have to look at this game in a different light, though. I really do.
But it could be. I don't know if you really want to reverse that philosophy a week before a game. You're like, oh, hey, guys, by the way, now we're not.
Maybe not reverse, but just in terms of like the minds of the players.
Yeah.
Just that
I think
pressure
honestly,
just taken off
I think
a little bit.
You don't even bring up the fact. Like, I mean, I know that the players know that it's a huge game. It's obviously the game of the year in the ACC, pretty much.
Yep.
But if you're a coach, you're just trying to, calm you guys down and be like, okay, we've got to do the
Clemson way.
Right. You know, I think Dabo has the quote where it's like, if you do common things in an uncommon way, you demand the attention of the world. Something to that effect.
Yep.
So if Clemson's able to come in and do all the standard things well, and occasionally break out a run or break out a pass or break out a special teams play, I think they will get it done.
Yep.
But I think Louisville is the real deal.
They're the real deal.
Yep.
I think they really are, but I just wouldn't get too overhyped. Just keep it at moderate amount right now. They're good. I don't think they're necessarily the best team in the country yet. I really don't. If they beat Clemson, absolutely. If they knock out Florida State and Clemson, they're number 1 in the country.
If they beat Clemson and Death Valley convincingly, I know they only have 6 first-place votes right now. Alabama still has 50. Alabama will definitely, I think they'll stay number 1 personally. I think it might be close, but they'll
the eye test. Louisville is
doesn't matter. It's Alabama. Alabama will stay number 1. Louisville and Alabama might share some votes. Yep. But it won't be it won't be a jump.
I think the 3 phases of the game, we may not win them all, but we got to compete.
Yep.
We got to compete. We got to stay in it, and we can't let this game get carried away.
For sure. Yeah, but that pretty much wraps up our show. We went through the week in review, and then we talked about one big thing from the Power 5, and then looked at some top 25 games. So for Bradley Kendall, I'm Jay Smith, and this has been After Further Review.
Thank you for watching.